Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to another Whenever I Want to movie review. Oh my goodness, it's been a minute. I kind of took a little bit of a breather after Christmas and the New Year and kind of settling back in, but I've been watching movies again. I kind of needed a break, to be honest with you. Just watched so many things, talked about so many things. I need a little bit of a break, but I've been getting back to it. I can't help it, being a movie nerd. It is what I like to do, you know? So today we're going to be talking about the recently just released film Run, Hide, Fight from 2020. It was produced in 2020, came out this year, and it has an interesting story behind its distribution. So we're going to get into that after we talk about the movie. We're going to talk about cinestate and Daily Wire and all the circumstances surrounding how it ended up coming out the way that it did. The plot synopsis here is 17-year-old Zoe Hall uses her wits, survival skills, and compassion to fight for her life and those of her fellow classmates against a group of live streaming school shooters. The film is written and directed by Kyle Rankin. It stars Thomas Jane, Radha Mitchell, Isabel May, Eli Brown, Ollie Sholaton, Treat Williams, Barbara Crampton, Cyrus Arnold, and others. And let's get right into it. So this thing is getting slaughtered by the mainstream press, which is weird. A lot of it is political, and we're going to get into that. A lot of it's politically motivated. But I want to tell you right now, this is a solid genre movie. It is a solid little piece of genre work. It's, an action thriller film. It's got elements of like Die Hard and Elephant. You ever see that movie by Gus Van Sant, Elephant, about school shooters back in the early 2000s? Well, it's like if you took kind of the concept of Die Hard and crossed it with Elephant. That would be the kind of the elevator pitch for what the movie is like when you're watching it. And then it adds all these sort of modern accoutrements and modern realities about what might motivate a school shooter, what kind of people might do it, et cetera, and how it would play out in a more modern context. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't expect to like it as much, I suppose. I heard about it a while ago because I'm a fan, or was a fan, of Cinestate. I don't know really what's left of Cinestate, but they did some good work. They put out a lot of Craig S. Zoller movies, and I'm a big fan of Craig S. Zoller. He did Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete, and he did all of those in conjunction with Cinestate. So I've kind of just been a fan of their brand, their perspective, the kind of movies they make. They make kind of these gritty genre movies that feel like they're throwbacks. They feel like they're kind of throwbacks to the 70s specifically, maybe a little early 80s stuff in there. And this movie kind of delivers on that. It is very much cut from that same cloth. It has the same kind of tone and style. It's a little bit more, I would say, populist in a certain sense. Like it's more of a crowd pleaser in a more traditional sense than Zoller's stuff. Zoller kind of goes where he wants to go and tells these very interesting, kind of hard-nosed stories. But here, the story is very simple. It's very basic. It has the film has kind of these kind of meager goals. It's very straightforward, and that ends up kind of being a good thing when you have like kind of a 90-minute action thriller, which is all takes place within a few hours. It's just constantly propulsive. It's constantly about escalation and raising the stakes and getting into new wrinkles in terms of what's going on with the characters and the plot. And I think it does it really well. It's a very well paced movie, and it gets into some deeper issues though. It's not just necessarily about a school shooting. Now that definitely is the backdrop. It is what's drawn most of the ire from a lot of the critical community, it seems like. But this movie it elevates it just ever so slightly. It just avoids being exploitative, I would say. It's not an exploitation movie. Because it deals with these things in kind of not the most brain dead way. Now, granted, I'm not going to say it's the most plausible thing or the most realistic movie or whatever. It's not trying to be either. It's kind of has like these kind of broad points about courage and dignity and doing what's right in the face of great adversity. Like that's kind of the themes of the film. And while I don't think it necessarily nails all of them, some of this stuff does feel like there's some loose ends at the end of the movie. I was like, well, I don't know if we've completely earned all of these conclusions, but having said that, I think the ride is a ton of fun. It's kind of phenomenally performed as well. Like the actors, really, really got to give it up to the actors, especially the young people. Isabel May, who's the main protagonist, Zoe. She is phenomenal. Like that's a movie star making performance in a different climate, in a different time, put out by a different studio. This probably gets a lot of recognition. Like, you know, because it kind of is on the same level, I would say, as something like not Get Out. What is it called? Oh, I can't remember what it's called. There's another indie horror thriller movie that came out a few years ago. Not Get Out. I can't remember. But it was also from kind of the same area, the Austin film scene, the greater Dallas area film scene. They all have kind of a certain tone, a certain kind of aesthetic. And this kind of definitely falls into that. And it's, you know, it's part of that's just the low budget nature of them. Part of that's the locations that they film. Everything kind of has this kind of verisimilitude in terms of the presentation. But yeah, and everybody's great. Like I said, especially Eli Brown, who plays Tristan Voy. He's the kind of the main protagonist. He's the leader of the school shooters. There's 4 kids that come in, and they come in like really bruising, shocking fashion, and it's very brutal, and you are immediately engaged because it takes its time. First 15 minutes, it sets up the characters. It kind of sets up a little bit of the dynamics. It sets up a few of the things that are going to happen later in terms of like, what's going to happen where and how it's going to happen. They kind of seed some information in there. So there's some cool surprises, but they're surprises that feel earned. And really, I mean, honestly, I don't want to say too much about the movie because it's not like predicated on a bunch of twists and turns and whatever. It is part of definitely the entertainment value is how kind of where it goes, how shocking it can feel sometimes. One of the things I did like about it, though, just broadly, was the fact that it is not one of these movies that's really trying to understand the plight of the school shooter. A lot of times there's kind of a romantic notion, like we want to understand, we want to learn, we want to spend time with them. Oftentimes with movies like this, especially when it's dealing with this kind of subject matter, it can feel exploitative. It can feel kind of, I don't know what to say. It's like almost too sympathetic. How much sympathy do you want to have for psychos, I suppose? Granted, not to say that you can't do interesting work in that field. I think actually one of the best movies that dealt with this idea of school shooters and being bullied and the pathology of somebody that would do that is this little Canadian movie from a few years back called The Dirties. Which is really great. It's one of my favorite kind of like found footage hangout thriller movies. It's a very unique tone that it strikes. It's funny. It's scary. It's revealing, I suppose. And I think Run, Hide, Fight is definitely in that kind of company, but for the heroic characters, for your heroes. Like I said, there is kind of a sense that it's modeled after kind of 80s action movies a la Die Hard, right? That's kind of where Zoe is. That's her character. She's the John McClane of this movie, and she's crawling through crawl spaces and running up and down halls and trying to figure out how to get people out and et cetera, et cetera. Like that's kind of the main journey that you're going on. It does pay some sort of lip service to the school shooters. It doesn't completely disregard their motivations. If I were to say anything, the motivations of them it's pretty shallow, but it's kind of used in an archetypal way to make a greater point about like social media. Because, one of the things that happens in the movie very early on is that the shooters want all of the students to point their phones at them and broadcast them live on like Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. So there is this kind of little bit of a running commentary about the nature of social media, the narcissism it can kind of create in people, and how that can kind of, the shallow celebrity of it all, and how that can kind of motivate somebody that feels ignored. This is a chance for them to do something where all eyes are going to be on them, and they get to have center stage, and they get to say what they want. I mean, there's some subtle stuff worked in there, like especially with the villains of the film, and the fact that they're not like philosophically coherent. They don't really know what they're talking about because they're kids. They're like 18 years old. The film takes place right before senior prom. Most of the main characters are seniors, and it's so if you've gone through school and you feel bullied, and it gets into these ideas of like you projecting your insecurities onto other people, that makes you feel even more oppressed, et cetera, et cetera. It does kind of have this sort of message of like bad shit happens to you sometimes. Social stigmas can happen, but that doesn't give you like some sort of extrajudicial right to find justice in a way like this, because of the cost of it and how scattershot it is. It's not pointed in any specific direction. So I think the movie, while it does have those things to say, it is in there. Maybe we could have gotten a little bit more depth into that stuff. Maybe a little bit more character development. It's a pretty tight cast for the most part in terms of people that actually have like, bigger roles, meaningful roles. It's like, 5 or 6 people. And I wish I got to know a little bit more about some of the characters, even the main character, Zoe. Like, I wish I got a little bit more of her. Not just because Isabel May is a great actress and she gives a great performance. She gives a great kind of action movie performance and is able to seed it with a little extra subtlety, a little extra nuance. Like I said, honestly, in a different climate, a different way it was released, this was probably a huge movie. This is a big movie for her. I don't know if that's going to happen the way it was released, but, c'est la vie. I guess she's going to have to kind of march just like the characters. Although, she's a newer actress. She's like 21. She's done some like Netflix TV shows, stuff like that. So this probably would have been her big breakout of that kind of stuff. Probably not going to happen. Tom Jane, one of my favorite character actors. I love Tom Jane. He's great in this. He's solid. He plays Zoe's father. And that's kind of where some of the added dimension of her character and where she's coming from and how she feels really comes from this relationship between her and her father. They're a little strained. She lost her mother to, it seems like, cancer, probably like a year before, sometime in the recent history. And it's kind of affected her life. She's retreated. She's become insular. She's cut off a lot of her family and her friends. So there is, there was, I think, an opportunity almost, and I think this was the intention, was to draw parallels between her pain and how she reacted to it, and kind of everybody, and not everybody else, but the shooters. I think there was a little bit of that, because there is like a one-on-one moment she has with one of the people that came in, and where she is in the power position, they have a conversation. And it seemed like they were kind of getting at this idea of like this personal pain, the things that teenagers go through. And she kind of has like this revelatory moment where she's like, oh, what the fuck do I know? What the fuck do I know about life or where it's going to go or anything like that? But like I said, still pretty solid. That would be my review. I don't know how to watch this movie though. And I guess this is how we'll get into the release of it. So this was, like I said, produced by Cinestate, made last year. Cinestate kind of falls under the weight of a scandal where one of their producers ends up, I guess he harassed some women on some sets, and then ends up even getting arrested for allegedly raping a 16-year-old girl at some point. So they kind of become the company becomes a victim of Me Too, because they say like, oh, well, the people that run Cinestate, which is Dallas Sonier and what is it? It's like Emily Pachekic or something like that. Probably not getting her name right. I know Dallas Sonier though, and allegedly they knew about it and they didn't fire him, and et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of just get canceled by the Dallas film community. So what happens is the Daily Wire, and if you don't know what the Daily Wire is, it's like Ben Shapiro's outfit, him, Jeremy Boring, Jeremy Clavin, some other people are on there. I'm not the biggest the Daily Wire person. I don't watch their stuff very much, but they want to do this initiative where they're coming to this understanding of like the culture war, right? But on a larger stage. They understand that, and this is true, if you think about Hollywood, and you think about the culture of Hollywood, like it's very left-leaning. It's all about kind of more progressive liberal values, which they're getting away from kind of more culturally conservative ways of thinking. It's really hard for conservative people or even people that are a little bit right of center to like get work or get their stories told or get their movies made. So they kind of want to start a studio. They want to start their own streaming service, their own platform, like Netflix or Hulu or whatever, Disney Plus. They want to start their own streaming service, and so they bought this movie after the fact and used it to premiere kind of their streaming service. The problem with that is, though, there is no other content. There's no other entertainment content. There's political punditry on there, but there is no other movies or TV shows. But apparently in the future, that's their plan. And this is kind of their flagship title right now. And what they did was they actually premiered it on YouTube last night on the 14th. They premiered it on YouTube, and they did like a kind of a backstage thing where they introduced the film. They talked about their intentions with buying it and premiering it, and then the movie played, and then the director and the producer D'Alessandro were there to answer questions and talk about what kind of the project and what they're doing and filmmaking, et cetera, et cetera. So it's being released by the Daily Wire. So, of course, it's just getting completely eviscerated. And it was getting eviscerated before that by the critics, mostly because of the subject matter of school shooting. People didn't really so much review the movie. They didn't talk about the movie. They just talk about the subject matter, how they feel about the subject matter, and how uncomfortable that makes them feel. Because there's a thread in the movie where it does have kind of more traditional-ish values, in the sense of like, there's stuff with like, people hunting and owning guns and them not being villains. In fact, it ends up being something that helps them at the end. And being a prepared person that way, ideas about the family, ideas about courage, ideas about integrity, like I said before. Like that's kind of what's seeded throughout the movie. About like the importance of the family unit. Things like that are in the movie. And they decided that, in this, to their credit, I think they're trying to be smart about it. They're like, we don't want to make propaganda. We don't want to make movies that preach to you. We don't want to make like Christian pure flicks type stuff where it's all like mediocre to bad movies that are just about the social message. Like that stuff should be in the subtext of your stories, right? And this is something that I think that in the modern era is a huge problem. Like subtext, I've talked about it a million times. Subtext is gone. Subtext is dead. It's just non-existent anymore in so many mainstream media stuff and entertainment. It's just not there anymore. And they kind of take the tact like, if it's a good movie, if it's a well-told story, you will not care about the politics of the movie. And this is something that I think anybody that's like right of center or conservative or whatever, or Republican, whatever you want to call it, this is something that you swallow all the time. People would swallow all the time. It wasn't as pernicious as it is today always. I mean, you can go back to the 90s, and there's a lot of movies in the 90s that kind of have these more traditional value sets kind of baked into them. An example would be something like Braveheart, right? Or even some of the action movies of the time. Think about something like, like The Rock. Think about Con Air. Con Air has tons of traditional values. The things that are important in that movie and important to the main character are very traditional things. So they're kind of, I guess that's where they're coming from. I don't know if their plan is to actually, right out of the gate, produce things themselves, or if they're going to buy more stuff. Like, I don't know what their plan is. The one unfortunate thing about this, though, is this movie, because they are basically starting the Daily Wire streaming service, is behind a paywall on the Daily Wire, which I think is a mistake. I think if it was temporarily like that, and then they allow it to go to traditional like pay-per-view stuff, like Amazon and whatnot, like if you can just go rent this somewhere, I think that would be a great idea. They were really, like, the marketing, how they marketed this movie was super muddy. And maybe that's on me. I don't know. But I don't really follow them very closely. So I honestly just stumbled onto this by happenstance. Like, because on YouTube, I'm going to subscribe to them. I had the night off, not doing any streams, not recording anything. And it just was there. And I was like, oh, shit, this is happening right now. I was like, are they going to show the movie? I wasn't even sure. So I just put it on. Lo and behold, title fade in. They're showing the movie. I was like, oh, cool. Awesome. So they did that for free on Thursday night, and now it's behind this paywall. And I think it's kind of a disservice to the movie, because the movie, I think, would probably do pretty well amongst like general audience genre people in terms of like pay-per-view stuff. I actually think it would probably do okay, especially in the climate we have now, where people are just thirsty for new movies, new solid movies, right? Something like we've talked about a few times on this channel, Fat Man by the Nelms brothers. That movie ended up doing really, really well. And the reason why is because there was no movie theaters. There's nothing else coming out. There's nothing else to see. I think they could have done something like that with this. I understand for what they're doing in terms of like a business perspective, but I do think it's going to rob the movie a little bit of an audience and accolades that it could have otherwise had. But before we go, let's talk about some of this critic stuff. Like I kind of mentioned what their perspective is, right? What they're saying about the movie. Let's just hop over here to Rotten Tomatoes. And let's just read some of the blurbs, because there's not a ton of reviews. 7, I think. All but 1 are rotten. And see what we got here. So we got from Jessica Kiang from the playlist. So somebody somewhere one day had a thought. What if Die Hard except a school shooting? And not only didn't they immediately check themselves for other symptoms of lead poisoning, but thought, yep, that's a winner. Again, nothing to do with the fucking movie. It often feels like an insanely poor taste experiment. It's hard to say what's more offensive, that Rankin is pissing into an overflowing reservoir of national pain, or that he's doing it so poorly. Just kidding. It's not hard at all. Well, at least he mentions like the quality of the film there. I give him that credit. David Ehrlich from IndieWire. Guy Lodge from Variety. What would you do? The film tastelessly needles its viewers throughout, presenting the brawniest, most impossible answer all the while. Yeah, because it's a fantasy. It's an action movie. It's not meant to be some sort of hyper-realistic take on what would happen. It's, like I said, it's structured kind of like a Die Hard. What's most notable about Kyle Rankin's slick and compulsively watchable genre entry Run, Hide, Fight is the utter shallowness of its psychological perspective. I guess, I mean, this is the thing, like, you're reviewing a movie that it's not, like I said, even when I said, I was like, it kind of works, even though maybe I would have preferred a few other things, but I don't really hold that against the movie. I think the movie itself actually works okay. It feels fundamentally tasteless, indeed just plain wrong. And the one positive review is from Christian Toto. It's not for everyone, but this indie thriller delivers smart, arresting action. Hollywood and Toto, I believe this is actually like a conservative. I think he might even have some sort of association with the Daily Wire. I'm not sure. But that's kind of like the general sentiment of a lot of the reviews. And if you go on Metacritic, there's a few more. But the audience notices are very positive. I don't know if that's like, I think there was some good positive stuff before the movie came out, because it premiered at Cannes. I think it's been making the rounds. People have been watching it over the past like 6 or 7 months, getting screeners and whatnot. But yeah, they're really going after it. And I totally think that the Daily Wire is a big part of it. There's a big story that came out just the other day. What day did this come out? It came out on the 14th, so it came out the day that the movie premiered, called, what's it called? The Ugly Backstory of Ben Shapiro's first movie, Run, Hide, Fight. Check this out here. Dallas Sonyang. There he is, them in the Shap. Ben Shapiro's. And this is a rehash of the Me Too thing that happened a year and a half ago, last year. This is basically they just bringing all that stuff back up, trying to kind of just further sully the name of the film and the people involved in making it. They obviously clearly were not fans of Cinestate to begin with. They even they go Amanda Pressmick, that's the other lady. They even go out of their way to say, Pressmick, the team behind Cinestate, a Dallas-based movie studio specializing in populist films for the Trump crowd, like Dragged Across Concrete, a nasty piece of police brutality apologia starring Mel Gibson. Which, it's not that. Actually, it's not at all. It's not a Trump movie. It's not a police brutality apologia. It's not like you didn't really watch the movie and engage with it. If that was your takeaway, that's a movie I look forward to doing a nice thoughtful Zoobox goes to the movies with somebody. I gotta rope somebody into watching that with me. Yeah, but this is just, it's a rehash of that, and then they interviewed people that worked on the crew, asking them how they felt about the Daily Wire review releasing it. Like and they only got like 3 or 4 people, and they're like, "Oh, I need my name taken off of it," blah blah blah. I didn't sign up for this, etc., etc. And to their credit, even the Daily Wire, when they were doing like the Q&A stuff, one of the people, I think, Jeremy Boring, I think his name is, he was like, you know what? If people from the cast or the crew, if they come after the movie on social media, we're not gonna respond. We're not gonna do anything because, well, they didn't sign up for this. They didn't sign up for the Daily Wire to release their movie and own their movie. So they're being fair about that, because it's the Daily Wire is what it is. It is a specifically modern iteration of conservative outlet. Like, that's what it is, and it makes no apologies about that. It doesn't try to say that it's unbiased or that it's straight news. It's all punditry, and that's their perspective. So, what are you gonna do? So it's kind of probably too bad for some of the actors involved, because they're clearly not going to get their day in the sun because of it. But it doesn't seem like it would have, I think the general audiences would really like it. I don't know if it would get a chance from the critics. I don't think they were ever going to embrace it, because just the idea that you make an empowering movie about a school shooting and you deal with it in an action movie sense. It's not like it's not a drama. It's not trying to make some sort of grand point. Honestly, it's not like about the nature of school shooting. It's not the focus of the movie. And they're just like, if you're not making a movie that's about school shooting, that's really about banning guns or whatever, or about police brutality, whatever. Like, if you're not doing that, then how dare you? How dare you make something that does not align with my worldview? And that was kind of the point of the Daily Wire guys. They were just like, listen, like I said before, we watch movies constantly that do not align with our worldview or our values. Some are better than others, obviously. But, it's interesting, going back to that notion of the subtext thing. Movies that do it really well, maybe in kind of a little bit of a pernicious or insidious way, are things like the Marvel movies. Because those movies are full of like statist propaganda, like bootlicking propaganda, just constant appeals to authority, yada yada yada. That stuff is all over that. Like, literally, the concept of the Avengers is like this clandestine, unelected shadow government gets to decide the fate of mankind, and they say that they deal with that in Civil War, and they deal with it in the dumbest fucking way. But anyways, that's a discussion for another day. But they're actually pretty good at seeding subtext into their movies. Not a lot of things are. Like, what did I see recently? My wife and I saw Promising Young Woman. And I gave a little bit of a mini review. If you go check out my best movies of 2020, I talk about it a little bit on there. Because I thought, like, the movie itself, objectively, just like I'm dealing with Run, Hide, Fight, I think that objectively the movie is successful. It achieves its goals. But that movie does not have subtext, really. It is very on the nose. It's basically just speaking the subtext and dialogue to you. And that is something that has always frustrated me. I think it's just bad writing, in my opinion. I don't look at it as anything other than that. It's just bad writing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how you're going to see this movie. If you get a chance, if you see it out there, if they ended up putting it on like a pay-per-view thing, I think it would be worth like the $5 or $6, honestly. If you're a genre fan, if you're an action movie fan, also if you were a fan of Cinestate from the days of yore, from last year, if you were a fan of those movies, what that production company was making, I think that you'll probably like this movie. I think it's solid. It's just a solid, good time. Good time. Just a solid action thriller. And it's not trying to be anything else. And I think it achieves that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my Twitter, for Dan's Twitter. Also, If you would like to make a request for a daily movie review or for something for Zoobox Goes to the Movies, leave it in the comments. Also, our email address is at the bottom of the description. So if you want to drop us a line, go ahead and do it there, man. I'll get back to you. I promise. At some point I will. All right, everybody.